And I asked him last night, I said, all right, when is this really going to start happening? And he said that, it's due to start in 2022, next year. But, it'll probably take 5 years before we really get it going. But whatever, it's in the works, we're not going back. And those three things, any one of those things would be phenomenally big. But to have 3 of them happen in 10 years, it's really not that long when you think about, cleaning up an activism is like geologic time, right? Nancy that. Arnold Combs, right there, you know what I'm talking about. So those are huge things that you should all be proud of, and we should really be happy, and we just really have to make sure that momentum that comes from that, keeps moving. So we're charging all of you with nagging your state representatives relentlessly.
I'm also curious if you know if during the pandemic, did they do anything during that period of time? Did they use that lack of sort of navigation on the river to do any cleanup efforts or anything like that?
All right, so there was a pilot cleanup of the sediment at river mile, I want to say 10.6. Yeah. And so it was surprisingly one of the heavier contaminated sites. A lot of dioxin, and okay, so that's 10 miles up. So imagine, we talked about the tidal actions,
right.
The rivers sending water back and forth, and all the way 10 miles up, there's this hot spot. It's like in your, near your neighborhood, near where you grew up. So it astounds me when I see the pictures of people swimming. Grandfather's generation was already polluted. Why were they swimming? You know why? Because they didn't know. Nobody told them what they were in. It's kind of devastating. We know now. We're educated about these things, but it's sad, a whole generation that really didn't realize they were swimming in very polluted water.
And Karen, I have another question for you. Can you talk a little bit about your restoration ecologies? I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about the board picture.
Yeah, sure. The film doesn't say so, but I work on the Supervisor for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. It's very hard to be in a film and say that you are representing a federal agency because then they just ruin the film. They just come in and tell you what you have to say.
This was all cleared up at the very early stages in our agreement. Carl was going to be the river guide and independent guide.
I mean, it's true. On the weekends, that's my own time. I mean, if I wanted to knit, I could be in a knitting movie, and it's nobody's business. So on the weekends, that's my time. So I just happen to like being on the river, like the gentleman who worked for Philadelphia Water Works. He just likes to be. He can't stop himself on the weekends. So it was our own time. We did it on our own time. It was great. It was a lot of fun. So my work is, I'm a restoration ecologist, I'm a landscape architect. Kudos to Lee Weintraub, who designed the Riverfront Park, who was a landscape architect and a colleague. So wonderful design. But the dioxin is right underneath that deck. It's in the sediment, it's right below it. So the work I do is habitat restoration, and habitat restoration is only possible when there's space to do it, and how you do it, and how we will do it, what kind of path we'll take to restore those components of the river that we talked about is still an open discussion. And it's going to take all of those 106 potential responsible parties, we call them, PRPs, to help to make that happen. So there's a compensation for the injuries to the river that is yet to be established. The cleanup, that's the EPA. The natural resource damage assessment and damage compensation, that's NOAA, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and the state of New Jersey. So there's a lot more to come after the cleanup occurs.
I'm wondering if